Generations are raised differently. Each generation may have similarities with others and may also have differences. Generally, generation is governed with sets of beliefs which are referred to as ideology. The previous generation's beliefs are classified as traditional ideologies, whereas for the new generation, it's called as liberal ideologies. As the new generations arise, new ideologies also arise, or if not, some of the ideologies that were used to believe by the preceding ones get modified. Because of the modification of the said ideologies, that may cause some misunderstandings as it may be taken as an insult or a form of disrespect by the other generation. Moreover, the new beliefs may not be aligned with what is considered as morally acceptable for the previous generations or the other way around, which may give birth to clashing of generations. What makes such thing even more complicated is the fact that humans can't just be able to get rid of something that they get used to believe in a short matter of time. Someone would ask among the two ideologies, what would you prefer to have? Would you prefer it to be in the traditional, or you're open to embrace a more open and modernized ideologies? This video aims to relay our stand about what would be our position between the traditional and the emerging liberal cultures, ideologies in modern perspective.
Sex and gender. The existence of LGBTQIA+ community. It is often argued that sex and gender are different. A lot of students are still a bit confused by this difference, and in fact, they often interchange these two unknowingly. By how it is defined today, sex refers to the sexuality of a person based on what is the present sexual organ. Basically, it is more on biological approach. For the gender, this is more on a societal approach, as this mainly refers to someone's identity in the society. In one of our discussions about sex and gender, it was pointed out that sex and gender were actually not kind of apart that much from each other, because sex in the first place, concepts of male and female, are actually just conceptualized, just like the notion man and woman, because no one knows that testes and penis are indication that these are for male and vagina is solely for female way thousands years ago. It's just that sex was contextualized as scientific in order for uniformity to get established, and gender was contextualized for more specific identification of oneself in society. The Philippines model of democracy and take on strongman policy. Philippines based its idea of democracy to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's idea of social contract and John Locke's belief about the existence of civil rights. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract refers to the agreement between the leader and the people. It merely suggests that such contract will allow the people's power to get recognized when it comes to electing someone to be a leader. After all, if there are no people to get led with, then what's the use of having a leader? This is believed to be the one that gave birth to what we call now as Constitution. As for John Locke's belief about civil rights, such thing created the notion of people having the rights to protect themselves and demand for competency. This aims to make people voice out their ideas and address some issues for what they think could lead to the betterment of everybody without any discrimination and unjust judgments coming from anyone. This then gave birth to civil government. If we will fuse the two mentioned ideas, we can infer that these are the models that we often perceive whenever we talk about democracy. However, these days, despite of the type of political ideology that we Filipinos possess and are believing, the idea of electing a strongman to be the leader of the state opened a long discourse. As expected, people are divided between those who believe that it will be detrimental as it may distort the sense of democracy and becomes a threat, and those who think that it's okay as long as he or she is a competent leader. This is a case-to-case scenario and depends on someone's perspective, but at the present, it is slowly being adopted, for it is believed to be something that could offer security and protection for the state and gets paired with any national or international conflicts in the present and even in the future. Who am I? A discourse about identity. The questions what and who am I are questions aiming for the same thing, and that is to fulfill the bottomless bottle of identity. A lot of ideas are introduced to give ideas to it, but the take of the philosophy of history is something that people should know about. During one of the days of our first week of discussion, we spent all of those in knowing the identity more. Among the points that were introduced, the following points were the best. People don't lose identity. There's no true Filipino. And lastly, our identity is a wrapped identity. People don't lose identity was one of those points being introduced, and this made the class pondered for a moment as this really intrigued each one's mind. The concept of losing identity is not believed to be true, and instead considered it as a hoax. There's no one who loses identity, but rather improves out of the adoptions coming from the influence of the surroundings. Next is the "there's no true Filipino." This particular line suggests that there's no true Filipino, as the word Filipino itself wasn't molded as an identity not until someone gave it to us. The argument was, how sure are we that there's a true Filipino if the word Filipino didn't even originated from our land? We were classified as Filipino, and we had such thing as we received it in a form of influence. Isn't it interesting? Okay, let's go now to the last point, which is the line, our identity is a wrapped identity. This was a line that somewhat summarizes the thoughts mentioned into one big point. This mainly suggests that our identity, if the word Filipino was just a product of influence, then therefore our identity is mainly consist of things, products of surroundings, particularly those that were brought by colonization. Our teacher once said, if we would take off the identity that we got from the Spanish, Americans, and Japanese, then who do you think we are as of this moment? Such thing really hits hard, as it really radiates a lot of sense, knowing that aside from us, molders of our own selves, there were actually people who took in charge of developing our historical background before us, which was one of the top things that filling the bottomless concept of what we call identity.
Deposition. With the continuous emergence of new cultures that somewhat cause some changes in terms of ideologies, the adjustment is needed, which most of us are probably knowing that this is something that is not clearly easy to do. A lot of considerations must be taken in order for 100% adjustment to be achieved, but unfortunately, that's already an idealistic rather than realistic ambition to think of. The modification of culture comes with big risk, depending on the scope of how big the changes were made, and that is what every generation should be aware of. The existence of LGBTQIA+ community, the topic about having a strong leader in a democratic country, and the existence of true Filipino are just things that have already been opened so largely that new ideas are just free coming in and out. As much as we like the idea of simplicity offered by the traditional ideologies, inclusivity that liberal cultures are giving us are undoubtedly more enjoyed by most of the people, and perhaps that testifies of which side we're leaning in. To summarize everything, ideologies and society go side by side. Ideologies are what molds human population, whereas society is the one who either adapts with the changes brought by the inevitable influence from nature, or simply get fooled by each other's entitlement of having the freedom to choose ideologies that they think suit to their life principles. We're always free to change our political viewpoints, especially when it's about people's sake.